Welcome to the PlantFit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Rik Schnabel. Rik is Australia's own Tony Robbins and a multiple best-selling author. Rik specializes in helping people shift their mindset to live a healthier, richer life. We start the conversation with Rik sharing about why a shift in mindset is the start to lasting physiological changes. Enjoy the presentation.
I just think overall it's got a lot to do with the fact that we just have not been educated around this space. I mean, think about it, well, actually that's the perfect phrase. Think about it. The moment you decide to put something in your mouth, we've never sat back and consciously thought about what determines what goes in our mouths. We have to actually turn a process, which is unconscious, into essentially a conscious process. So we've got to think, who is the thinker? And not only that, who determines what the thinker thinks? And, these are very, very deep level questions. And of course, very few of us even think that deeply. So what we'll do is we'll just grab something, put it in our mouth, ingest it, have the same reactions we normally have, the allergies, the flatulence, the low level energies, or the high level energies, the feeling great, all that sort of jazz. So typically we're not conscious enough.
Maybe just to set the frame, right? Because obviously there's nutrition, fitness, and mindset, somewhat like Luke said. In the whole frame, where does mindset fit in, and how does it determine the rest?
Well, if you think about it, the very first decision that you might have made, such as I want to get my body fit, or I want to eat better, or I want to improve my life, it starts with a thought. Everything typically starts with a thought, and a thought then becomes chemistry. And that chemistry, is that hormone that goes into our body and determines how we feel. And what we will do typically, if you look at a person's behavior, it's a very simple mathematical solution. In that what it is, it's a thought pattern that meets a feeling pattern, and they're congruent. So the thoughts are the same as the feelings, and they're the things we're going to do. But if a thought conflicts with a feeling, then we'll adjust one or both to be able to be more congruent to who we think we are. So everything starts with a thought. Everything.
So if we go even before the thought, what actually influences thought? Because we do have positive thoughts and not so good thoughts. What influences those thought processes?
Yeah, basically there are quite a number of filters if we think about this. Most of it comes from, and the easiest way to explain this is from our past. So if you think about from about 0 to 7, essentially there was a guy called Morris Massey many years ago. Dr. Morris Massey started looking at behavior and where does it actually come from? And so he's put our behavior into years, like you go from 0 to 7. And from 0 to 7, he called that the imprint period. So the imprint period is kind of like a cookie cutter approach or a sponge. You watch your parents, the people around you, you get a sense of what the world actually is, and you will cookie cutter that into your own thinking. Whatever your parents are doing, or whatever those people around you are doing, you will think that that's right. And so if you look at your parents' behavior, typically you're either going to follow it precisely, or what you're going to do is do the opposite. Like if you think what their outcomes are and you don't like their outcomes, you'll do the absolute opposite. I'll give you a classic example. When I was growing up, I came from a very poor family. And one thing that seemed to be an emotional period in my life was going to what we call the canteen. And the canteen is where you got all the yummy foods. Now, all of my friends used to get pocket money and go to this box, and they used to get boxes and come out with these amazing boxes and eat them and consume them, and I didn't get that. So what I did is I looked at my parents and I asked myself the question, why do they not give me pocket money when all other parents do? And so instead of conforming to my parents' patterns, I rebelled. I kicked against that. So I became an entrepreneur from a very young age. So I did the opposite to my parents. And so we'll either do the opposite or the same. And in fact, one thing that happens, have you ever seen those little kids, in a shopping center, and they're all holding their parents' hands and they're around, that eye level point in a shopping center where all the toys are hanging from the shelves? And then the kids, point to the toys and they say, I want that. Now, in that moment, how that parent responds determines whether a child will have a poverty mentality or a prosperous mentality. If it's a prosperous mentality, typically the parent will just pick it up and go, there you go, and pop it in the trolley. A poverty mentality comes from one statement, and I've heard it many times in shopping centers. Honey, we can't afford that. Or if it's even more emotional, like, we can't afford that. What do you think? Money grows on trees, etc. Well, what happens in the imprint period, we just take that on as gospel. We take that on as absolutely validified. That's how the world works. We are poor, and so forth. And so we will work with that mindset for the rest of our lives until we get to a point that we want to buy our first house, or we want to, buy our first investment, or whatever it might be. Then we've got to fight against that imprint period and all the mental values around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And obviously, taking that same concept and applying it to nutrition, it seems like most of our lives we're somewhat reacting to the imprint period. And then at one point, which the audience and us are right now, we try to make conscious decisions on food, fitness, exercise, all this kind of thing, right? So maybe if you can walk us, and I know ahead of time you gave us a 7-step process on how we can actually consciously make that decision on what to eat, when to exercise, if to even start exercising, what blockages are in the way. And you have that 7-step process. If maybe we could walk through those 7 steps and maybe help the audience as well to make that conscious decision rather than taking it from the imprint period when we were all young.
Yeah. Well, if I can preface all of this in the context of, if we think about food right now, and we think about how we used to think about food. Now, let's go way, way back to Neanderthal times. Neanderthal times was a time in perhaps our history where what we had to do was we went with what we thought was the most natural thing to do. And that was to eat another walking being, i.e. animals. And so typically we had trained ourselves to go ahead and eat animals. Of course, we also ate berries and plants and anything that didn't kill the family. So we looked with evidence to see who got sick and who didn't, who died, who didn't, what did they eat, what caused that. And eventually that got us to make choices about what will essentially keep us alive. Then as we've progressed, we've got to this point where we now think, well, that's not the only equation that we're looking for. What we're also looking for is nutrition now. So now we start looking at various foods, where we're going to get our nutrition from. And so now we're making different choices. Now, equally, what has also come into the foray is an ecological standpoint, such as what does harvesting, millions or billions of cows, and animals around the planet, what does that do, from a sustainability model? Is that the best thing to be doing from a sustainability model? Does it work nutritionally? And of course, we've got this whole debate about protein and so forth. So the thing that's happening right now is we're becoming conscious. So we're becoming more and more and more aware of our foods, for example, and what they actually do to sustain us and make us the human beings that we ideally, truthfully want to become. So when we look at that 7-step process, we need to be conscious of really what we actually want to create in our life. And once we become conscious of what we want to create in our life, it then begs the question, how do you make that a reality? And let's make it really specific. And if I could, I'll take it down the path of, let's say, income, because that's something that pretty much challenges most people. Such as they want to earn more or create more in their world, and so we still have the same debate. That is, there's an ethical debate as far as income is concerned. There's also a sustainable debate as well, as far as income's concerned. We can't just keep producing things to make enormous amounts of money when, to the detriment, we see our environment suffering. And we see a shorter sustainable model, such as, thank God, around the world, many people are becoming far more responsible, and they're not polluting rivers as they once did. Produce some widget in a factory and just pump out the effluent, into our oceans. Of course, more and more consciousness is growing around that that's not a sustainable model. It's not a good model. So the first thing that has to happen is we have to determine what we actually want. And we've got to think about what is it that we want. And the moment we do that, the first thing that's going to arrive is our identity. That is, are we the sort of person that can make that a reality? Or is there something stopping us from making this a reality? And the reason this has not been something that many people have been talking about is because it's too complicated. It's far too complicated. It's better to ignore it. It's better to just go with what we know and just continue moving along the path that we've been moving along, and put ourselves into a bunch of statistics, such as 70% of people are ... 30% are ... And one statistic is, I saw a horrendous statistic in Australia. It was created by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And they said that everyone living today, there would be 95% of those people that would fit in one of three categories. That's either they're going to be dead by the time they retire, or they're going to be dead broke, or they're going to be putting out their hand for government assistance somewhere through their lives. Now, when I first heard that statistic, it was horrifying. In fact, I can't even find that statistic anymore. So the ABS have pulled it off everything. You can't find that statistic anymore. But it said that 5% of people would be wealthy or be able to sustain their lives for the rest of their lives until they're passing. So that is a horrifying statistic. But what it says is, it says that our thinking is developing that, because that's at the very core of this. So I'd like to just go down a little bit deeper into thinking and, talk about what thinking is, because most people put thinking up there, but, thinking, there's more detail in thinking than just thinking, as a chunked up idea. For example, one very key element, and many of my early years of coaching was all based around beliefs. And what I realized was that many people's very beliefs determine what they will do and won't do. So one way to think about this, a belief is like an on or an off button. So to make this relevant and put this into context, imagine that all of a sudden you guys decide, that's it. I'm taking my world to the next level, and I've got a vision, and I want to raise $1 million. Now, if you have no beliefs around that, such as, come on, $1 million, raise $1 million, that's impossible. How can I do that? I look at my father, I look at my mother, they never did it. So how can I? So from that particular instance, you're going to have to address those beliefs, because if you don't, you've already got a set off button that says it's impossible. So I don't know about you, but have you ever had a belief that you worked against? For example, if you believe that you could make $100,000 in the next hour, and your belief says you can't, have you ever just done it anyway? In most cases, most people don't. If they believe that it's impossible to do, they won't. And I'll give you a classic example of this. I did a workshop recently, and in this workshop, they asked me to really challenge their financial beliefs. And I did. And I remember one of my mentors, he used to make between $3 and $6 million in a weekend. Now, I said weekend, and I saw all the faces in the room go like this. which, by the way, is a physiology sign of shock. You know, when someone just freezes like that, or you see a lot of their whites of their eyes, that's typically a physiology reaction of shock. And they were just shocked, and they could not compute that idea. In fact, they became the only thing they could be in that moment, and which was offended. So they became offended. And because they took it on as an identity, what, you're telling me, you know, I'm little or I'm small or I can't do that, you know, so it really rubbed up against their beliefs. So the very first thing that we really have to do if we want to move forward is we've got to adjust our beliefs. We have to begin to believe that something's possible in order for us to do what is possible work towards achieving it. So does that compute? Does that make some sense for you guys?
Yeah. From what I understood, basically, is instead of just setting a goal, that's not enough, right? Because if a goal, we don't have any belief in it, we might never take action, or we take something that's not actually leading towards that goal. So building the belief ahead of time is very important. Let's say someone, you know, is starting out on their journey and they have never done something like that, right? So obviously you're taking the example of finance, but it applies to nutrition and fitness or any other area. Where would they get that belief from to not just set a goal, but actually take action towards that goal?
Okay, that's a really good question, Toby. It's essentially what they've got to do is they've got to start to look for evidence. And typically that's how we build a belief. It's very difficult to build a belief out of thin air without any sort of evidence. You know, so for example, if we believe that we, you know, let's say we wanted to bodybuild and we looked at our body shape in the mirror and our personal trainer might say, look, you haven't got the body type, you know, like what they said to Arnold Schwarzenegger when he first started getting into bodybuilding. You know, his trainer said, come on, you know, you just haven't got the body type. And he just persisted anyway because he had a belief system, and of course the rest is history. However, to build belief, we have to start looking for evidence. So we've got to start looking for the sorts of bits and pieces that can have us starting to believe in the possibility of it. And you know, there's a process that I've been taught to do and I teach many students to do, which is how to change beliefs out of thin air. But here on this particular program, I don't want to go through that because it takes quite a while to teach. It's a very complicated process when you first hear it. And the truth is that most people would be switched off anyway because they'd be thinking, what, build a belief out of nothing? So what we've got to do is we've got to build some foundation stones where it opens this door for what is reality or what could be a new reality. For example, what was his name? The guy who broke the 3-minute mile, his name's going to come to me in a moment, Roger Bannister. Yeah, Roger Bannister. When he broke, you know, the 4-minute mile, when he broke that timing, you know, no one believed it was possible. But yet when he broke it, within a short space of time, there were many people who all of a sudden saw evidence of what he was able to create. And what they then did is they then followed on from that. So the thing that we've got to start doing is looking for evidence. Today with, you know, the advent of, you know, Google and the internet and so forth, I mean, we can look down so many different corridors and we can start looking for evidence. Now, after we find evidence, the next thing we're going to have to build is a strategy. You know, that is, how did that person who achieved that, how did they go? What were the stepping stones? So, you know, in truth, to achieve anything, once we've got the belief going, the next level is we've got to start looking forward to some strategies. And we've got a strategy is just like baking a cake, really. Essentially what you have is you have ingredients and then there's a sequence to it. You know, for example, if you go to bake a cake and you leave the mixing bowl and you leave that to the end of the process, then all you end up with is a mess. You know, when you try mixing ingredients without a mixing bowl, for example. So we know that there are ingredients and there is a sequence to everything. And this is much of what, what Luke mentioned before, neuro-linguistic programming. Much of neuro-linguistic programming is very much about modeling. It's very much about looking at a model that works and then looking at the steps of that model. That's what you would call the macro strategies, the obvious things that you can see, like a golf swing. But the thing that really makes a difference, and this is what's starting to become, more and more people are becoming aware of this, it's actually this. What happens up here when the golf swing kicks into play? So for example, if you've got a golfer that's doing everything right, but in their head they're thinking, no way, there's no way I'm going to hit this perfectly. There is no way I'm going to hit this perfectly. No way I'm going to hit this perfectly. What's going to happen is they're going to conform to their beliefs. Regardless of their belief, be it good or bad, it's going to be right. There was a guy called Robert Anton Wilson, and Robert Anton Wilson used to say, what the believer believes, the prover proves. So in other words, what you believe, you're going to prove it to yourself. Those people who say, look, I'm never going to start a business because I'd fail, they will never start a business. And if they do, they will prove that they're right. They'll fail and they'll get to the end of their business and they'll say, well, I just knew I was going to fail. I just knew it. But I've also seen this in amazing ways. I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and I started doing work, kind of much deeper neurological work in the context of health. And I've worked with people with cancer, I've worked with people with multiple sclerosis, I've worked with people with chronic fatigue and so forth. And I've seen these people actually recover. And they've recovered through their thinking. And the very first thing that you've got to start with is the belief. You've actually got to mess with their beliefs so much that they're confused, and then allow them to, we hate confusion. So the first thing we're going to do is, look for clarity and hope that what you've done is created the conditions so that they get a new clarity, a new belief. And that new belief can spur you on to all sorts of amazing outcomes. But the first thing we've got to ask ourselves, if we're not achieving what we're achieving, we've got to say, well, what's my belief system? What's it actually telling me?
So while we're on beliefs, because I know you've worked with a whole host of clients with wealth and health. So for example, someone comes to you or a coach saying, oh, I want to lose body fat. What is potentially an underlying belief that may be creating that thought process or even those words based on your experience? Because it could be insecurities, but what have you noticed?
If we look in the context of fat, and I can remember I ran a seminar in Melbourne at one point, and this was largely about mindset around weight, and losing weight. I think for a start, this whole idea of losing weight is not attractive. It's not a great way to position anything. No one likes to lose anything. So, from a mindset position, it doesn't really work. But in the context of this group, I said, what I'd like you to do is give me the words that you think about when you think of those favorite foods, those foods that are not right for you, but you eat them anyway. So people were thinking about ice creams and chocolates and thises and that's. And they started using words such as, they gave me words and I wrote them all up on a, butcher paper. And they were words like delicious, yummy, divine, tasty, yum, warm, cuddle, hug, and they started using all of these words. And then what I did is I crossed out food at the top and I replaced it with the word love. And I said, would these words equally describe love? Now, this answers your question, Luke, in that what happens a lot of the time is that people are eating the foods that they probably shouldn't or know that are not ideal for them, largely because what they're doing is they're not going for the foods alone. What they're actually often looking for is that feeling that they're not getting in their own personal life. You look at someone who is unloved and really believes that they're unloved by their parents or their partner or whoever they desire the love from, and you'll typically find a replacement to that, and it will be the chocolate that they have at night. Or it'll be that big bowl of ice cream that they have at night, or, and it's regular, and we need love more than anything. Human beings, we absolutely crave and desire love. And if we don't get it, we're going to replace it with something. So that would be the first thing that I would be doing. I'd be looking from a mindset standpoint, what is stopping that person from creating the ideal body shape? Then I'd be looking at behavior, other behavior such as the sort of behavior that they know that they need to do, but they don't do it. Now, here's one aspect. Let's say if we exercise and, the magic number for us is, 99 repetitions. And, we always seem to get to about 50. We don't get to 99, we get to 50. So we're doing something, but we're not really getting to 99. And so the thing that I would be asking my client is I would be getting them to close their eyes and imagine themselves in a process of thinking and exercising, whatever that repetition is. And all they have to do is do it in their mind's eye and then get them to imagine that they've gotten to number 50 and then say, okay, so what's happening now? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? Or what do you say to yourself just before you quit? And that will be the answer. That will give you the answer why they're only getting to 50. They get to a point where they might say in their head, I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. Or I always quit before I succeed, and so forth. So that would be an AD strategy that they have that is really stopping them from moving forward. So that's stopping them at 50. Or they'll have a feeling in their body, and the feeling in their body might be, let's say they're, doing some cardio and they get to the heart rate and they have this feeling in their body where they feel like their heart is going to pop through their chest or they're going to have a heart attack or something along that line, and they'll stop at that point, or they might see a picture of themselves, back in school when they were picked on, being bullied. And they might identify more with that picture in the past than the picture that they could have of themselves as their ideal self. So these are the conversations that really the populace should be having. We should be more conscious of what's creating our outcomes, and thinking is just not thinking. Thinking is a level of beliefs, it's a level of values, it's self-talk, it's feelings in the body, it's pictures we have in our head. These are all thinkings, because a thinking is really a thought, is just a question and an answer that comes in an image, or it comes in a feeling, or it comes in a set of words. But these are the sorts of, like if you're a personal trainer and you're working with someone and you're thinking, why don't they get beyond 50? They know that 99 is the magic number. Why don't they do it? Well, if you could listen to the dialogue going on in their heads at the point that they hit 49, then there's your answer.
So for someone who wants to go through that process themselves, how can they find out what thoughts pop into their heads when they do it? Like, it's almost like you got to watch yourself, which might not be the easiest thing to do. But how can you find out what's actually stopping you? And obviously, the following question is how to overcome that.
Okay, how about we do this, Toby? I want you to think right now of the person who just asked me that question. So just think about yourself, the person who asked me that question. And now what I want you to do is I want you to observe that person that asked me that question, and who is the person who is observing that person who asked me that question?
Well, it's me in like another position, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, which in NLP we'll call that the second position. So that's the second position, yeah? So who is watching that person?
Yeah, it would be me.
But is it you? Is it you, or is it something else?
I have no idea.
And And that's the aspect of consciousness. The aspect of consciousness is we've almost got to do that. We've got to ask ourselves, who is the thinker here? And who is the originator of those thoughts? And who is observing those thoughts? And I guess what we're doing in a sense is we're kind of imagining ourselves stepping outside of ourselves firstly. The moment we ask that question, we've got to metaphorically or in a visual sense, we've got to kind of get outside of ourselves. And the moment we get outside of ourselves, what we can actually do then is we can start observing more. So that's the very first thing that needs to happen. We need to step outside of ourselves. And there's lots of ways to do that. Like if I gave you steps and said, okay, how do you do this? Well, first thing you could do is you could close your eyes and you could imagine yourself rising above yourself and looking at yourself, like from way up there, you know, looking down at yourself, sitting down as you are right now. And then asking yourself certain questions, you know, who is this person? Who is this person really? What is this person here for? Like, what's their highest level purpose? Why were they born? Why are they here on this earth? Now, what that actually does is that moves actually into what I call fourth dimensional thinking. So essentially what you're doing is you're looking from a higher source. And this is where if you have a person who can get beyond themselves almost to the point where they're looking from, let's call it God's perspective or Muhammad's perspective or Buddha's perspective or the universe's perspective, whatever is their belief or faith, then if a person can see, like, let's just choose one and let's call it the universe. If a person could just look through the universe's eyes at themselves and ask the question, why am I here? You're likely to get a higher level answer than I'm just here for the Plant Summit right now. You know? So, for example, if I do that with myself, right now, there's just three of us here, you know, in this environment. You're asking me questions. I am then answering those questions as best as I can, but my higher self or my fourth dimensional thinking is saying, well, I'm not here just for me and I'm not here just for you either. I'm actually here for all these other people who are watching this right now, perhaps asking themselves bigger questions too. You know, why am I here? Why am I here? And so if we can rise above ourselves and see ourselves as having that bigger mission, or that bigger vision, then it's very useful because instead of shrinking our world can start to expand. You know, and that's what we started off talking about, you know, at the early part of our conversation about things such as sustainability and ecology. If we're here just for ourselves, we will probably be quite selfish, you know, quite narcissistic, quite short-term focused, quite individual. But if we're here for others, then, you know, our purpose seems to be grander, greater, and therefore our momentum typically is grander or greater. So let's go back to the person who is, let's say, trying to get rid of some weight. If they're here for themselves, you know, they go back to the cupboard or the fridge constantly looking for food. And they're trying to fill a hole inside of them, a metaphorical hole that really isn't there, but they think it's there, and so they're filling it. And it's an infinite hole. It'll just keep requiring things. However, if they just rise above themselves and they ask themselves the question, why am I really here? And why am I doing this behavior? Why am I eating all this ice cream, eating all this chocolate? Well, if I'm here to create overweight children, if I'm here to teach my children how not to be, then I'm a success. But is that my purpose? Like, am I really here actually to burn a candle, perhaps for my children? Am I here to be the example, to show my kids how great you can be? Well, then they'll make new choices. You know, they'll make new decisions because they're working from a higher level perspective. And that's a really key, I think, fundamental part of all success. And I've found this over the years. I've worked with some incredible people who have achieved in so many different areas. I've worked with millionaires, billionaires, movie stars, rock stars, people who have achieved a lot of success in their lives. And typically, they all have this fourth dimensional type thinking about them. They feel that they're here for a bigger reason, and so they create a bigger life. Whereas conversely, those people who are very self-focused create a bigger ideas and concepts that are all very self-focused.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And also it ties back to, I think somehow we're still at the first step, for me at least, which is goal setting. And there's so much that goes into it. But I love the idea of having the goal not just to be the initial thought, but to take it to the next level and ask, okay, what's actually the purpose? And then the goal becomes so much more powerful and you build momentum. So let's just say that's step number one. We set a goal, right? we with the beliefs, building the beliefs, and having a purposeful goal to build momentum. So what's the next step?
Cool. So what we have to do next is we really have to look from a reality perspective. Like, we've built the goal, we've got an idea of where we want to be. We've gone to a fourth dimensional plane. We've looked at ourselves, said, why are we here? What is the bigger reason? Now what we have to do is we have to look at where we are now. What is the reality now? And, what that is going to give us is that's going to start the formation of the map. I mean, if we want to go to America, for example, we have to know where we are now in order to get there, because we've got no idea. Are we going north, south, east, or west? So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to say, okay, so where are we now? And, in the context of weight, for example, we'll look at, what is our current weight right now? Be honest. And, in the context of income creation or wealth, we've got to ask, what's our net worth now? Let's not sugarcoat it. Let's look at reality, what it is now. And that's a very simple step. It's usually the biggest pill to swallow. But essentially, it's a very real pill, and it's really, really important. So we've been very short on the second step, so let's jump to the third. So the third step is, I think, is quite a critical step, and this is a step that most people find the most challenging, and that is what's stopping us. Why are we not creating what it is that we really want to create? And, in the third step, essentially what we're going to be really looking at is, we're going to be looking for a model, somebody who's achieved, or some organization who is achieved, or somebody, some individual that is actually achieving what we want to achieve. So that gives us a little bit of a roadmap. So what we're going to find out is what are they thinking? What are they doing? What do they eat? What don't they eat? And creating the conditions, the perfect conditions to really get a great result. For example, I'm a surfer. So, I really like surfing. And so the most important thing that we've got to do is we call it in our modeling chunking. So if someone comes to you and says, I want a happy life, that is very hard to obtain because we don't have much detail. It's too big. It's up here. It's too fourth dimensional. We're not now got to bring it down to very much a 3-dimension. And, so the third dimension is essentially really looking at stuff that we can see. And we've got to chunk it appropriately. So if I want to become a better surfer, I have to look at the elements that make me a better surfer. So they are paddling. So I've got to be able to, paddle, and I've got to paddle for really long periods of time, because you're usually surfing for 3 hours, 2 hours, sometimes 4 hours. It's a long time, and you're paddling kilometers. So, you want to get your health right up there to be able to do that. But paddling's only one part of it. It's not going to make me a great surfer. It's going to keep me in the water longer, but it's not going to make me a great surfer. So the next thing I've got to do is I've got to learn the currents. I've got to learn the tides. I've got to learn the shape of various waves. I've got to learn where to be on the wave. So if we chunk it again, we would look at positioning. So where do you position yourself in order to be the best you can be? So if I live in the middle of Mexico, or right central America, it's not going to be the best spot to make me a good surfer. So I've got to condition myself by being close to that conditions me, such as someone who says, I want to be amazingly fit and never ever goes into a gym or never works out. So you've got to put yourself into proximity, and proximity is power. So it's a really important thing to do, to put yourself in the environment, chunk it appropriately, ask yourself, what do I have to do and what are the chunks of it? So in surfing, it is fitness, so cardio, paddling fitness, long duration fitness, but peak bursts too. So the peak bursts happen when you're paddling towards a wave, or actually you're paddling away from a wave, but it's also positioning, how you position yourself. Like if the wave is there and you position yourself like that, you're going in for a nosedive. So you have to change your trajectory, but that changes based on waves. So you're doing that. Then there's a surfboard you choose to use and so forth. So we've got to get so in touch and in tune with what we want to achieve. So we need to be hearing from people who have already achieved. We want to get right into their mindset, not just look at what they do, how they bake a cake, and not only the sequence that they use, what ingredient do they use first and what do they use the most, but we want to find out, what are they saying to themselves? What pictures do they get in their heads? And this is where it starts to move into a very deep science. For example, I'll give you one example of this. If you see yourself in a picture, you set a goal and you see yourself in the picture, that's what we call a disassociated image, which means that there's no emotion attached to that. But if we see ourselves in the experience, like through our own eyes, that's called an associated image. There's more emotion attached to that. And so in goal setting, we've actually got to see ourselves like we are looking through our own eyes, like we are there. And that's going to create more of an emotional experience rather than seeing ourselves in the picture. So, from a goal setting perspective, it is really important to chunk it appropriately, look at where we're going, that is, in the modeling, but we've also got to ask ourselves, what's really stopping us? What belief system is stopping us? What did our parents do in the past that doesn't, that predicates our behavior that we've been modeling? And something that we've often got to do is do everything completely different. So that's really, third step, is really defining exactly, where you actually want to go and know what is really stopping us from really getting there. And then the fourth step is getting into the mindset, getting our mind fit, building that muscle so we can totally believe that we're going to make this happen. And whatever that takes, you modeling other people, rehearsing in our heads. Actually, here's a classic example. There was a Winter Olympics, and I think it was in the 80s. It might have even been 1980. And the USSR team at the time, they split them into four. They split their entire team into four, and it was literally drawn out of a hat, determined which team you went into. And in these teams, what they did is team one trained for all available time. Team two trained for 3/4 of the time. Team three trained for half of the time. Team four trained for 1/4 of the time. And the rest of the time, what they did is visualized. They imagined themselves doing the perfect, what's it called in weightlifting when you lift and
Clean.
What's it called? Clean. That particular move. They imagine themselves doing the perfect lift and jerk. Clean and jerk. That's it. So what they did is they imagined themselves doing that. Now, the team that got more gold medals than any other team was the fourth team, the team that train the least but visualize the most. And the reason I believe that they did that was, or they achieved that, was because they had manifested it in their mind. They'd rehearsed it so many times perfectly that their mind was able to actually see it come together, you know, in a really powerful way. So, you know, if you want a goal, one little tip that I would give everyone right now is just before you fall asleep, you move to a state of alpha. And alpha means you're not asleep yet. You're very, very relaxed. So people who meditate, people who do mindfulness, you know, people who do hypnosis and so forth, typically will go from beta, which is high level aware, or even gamma, which is stress or freak out. And then they come down to alpha, which is starting their heart rate, or their brain and heart rate starts to change. Instead of being that, it starts to do this. Now, when we get to alpha, we are more susceptible to placing images and ideas in our minds that conflict to our reality. So, you know, if I said to you, right, I want you to see yourself as the Prime Minister or the President of the country that you live in right now. Now, your belief system right now is going to probably go, no way, Jose, I cannot see that. It's not me, you know, I'm not this enough, that enough, etc. enough. So that's because you're in high level beta. And the more stressed you are, the more resistant you are to any new idea. However, if you were relaxed and you were an alpha, and then I said, okay, just imagine yourself now. Imagine yourself, it's the inauguration. And there you are in front of an audience announcing your presidentship or your prime ministership. You could imagine that more so in alpha than you can in beta. So alpha happens before we go to sleep. So it's a good time to start putting in suggestions into your own thinking that you really want to achieve. You know, I rehearse every night before I'm about to achieve something. I will just lay in bed, get myself relaxed. I usually meditate 30 minutes morning, 30 minutes night, you know, and I do it religiously. And so I will do it in my meditations. I'll just simply rehearse and I'll just go through the perfect outcome. Now, by the way, this does get a little bit spooky sometimes. I used to do this when I was in sales, and I learned this when I was in sales. I used to, before I got to my meetings, 10 minutes before, I'd sit in my car and just rehearse the perfect meeting, the perfect outcome. And I can remember one particular meeting, I walked in this meeting and the people I presented to started to say the things that I imagined in my head. And I knew in that moment I'd mastered this. And so from that standpoint, that's a really powerful time, because your model, your identity of who you think you are, you will conform to that. Whatever you think you are, you will conform to that, regardless of whether it's good, bad, indifferent. So when we go to chase a goal, there's got to be a part of us that actually sees ourselves as someone who we're not. And our beta level thinking is going to beat us up. It's going to say, crap, that's rubbish. I'm never going to achieve that. You know, are you for real? And you're going to have this argument with yourself. So get yourself into alpha before you go to sleep. Run through your ideal outcome. And even if you've been modeling and you know exactly what you need to do tomorrow to start to achieve what you want to achieve in the future, imagine yourself achieving that. You know, like the example that I gave you earlier, you know, the person who stops at 50, for example, you know, or stops at 50. If that person can then run through their mind, they go way beyond 50. They're now hitting 60. They're now hitting 70. They're going beyond 99. They're now hitting 109, 129, 139, you know, because the mind is amazing. You know, I remember one time before I lived right near the coast, I used to go swimming every morning. And I used to swim for half an hour solid. So I just jump in the pool and 30 minutes just backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And I can remember I used to get around the 15-minute mark and I used to automatically feel tired. But I used to keep swimming anyway, But and I noticed, I'd look at my watch, I go, 15 minutes again. It's at that 15-minute mark. What's going on in my head? And I had just set some unconscious pattern. I don't know why, but I just set this unconscious pattern that when I got to 15 minutes, that I would slow down. But this time, what I did is I just used a metaphor. I thought, wait a minute. If I were a shark, sharks just swim. They do. They just do. But they don't think about it as exercise. They don't think about, oh my God, I've got to try to make 2 kilometers today. They're not thinking like that. I'm sure they're not thinking like that. And so I thought to myself, be the shark. Just be a shark. Just swim because you can. Just keep going. Just swim because you can. And what I found was I broke through that 15-minute threshold. Once I started being the shark, I just thought a shark has conditioned over generations, has conditioned their body to just continually swim. So why can't we? I mean, why can't we condition whatever we want to condition? Why can't we do that? And again, we come back to the belief. Because it's not true, Rik. That's why we can't. But if we let that back, if we drop that down and say, well, what if we can? What if we're completely wrong about this? What if we can? What if we can go further, faster, smarter, harder, better? What if we can? And every great leader in the world who's ever broken through anything said the same thing. What if we can? What if we can? What if just because everybody thinks it's right doesn't mean it's right? Because everybody was thinking about 100 years ago that heroin was good for you. So, but it's not necessarily just because all doctors and others believe that heroin was good for you. It doesn't necessarily mean it is.
So what are some of the, like self-sabotaging beliefs, patterns, maybe even metaphors that people use to keep them from achieving any like fitness goal or health goal?
Well, that's a perfect question, Toby, for a number of reasons. One is you spoke about metaphors. And one thing that stops people from achieving is their stories. It's the story that they keep telling themselves over and over again. And, that story is like my story used to be, I'm the poor kid from the burbs. I'm the poor kid from the burbs. I'm the poor kid from the burbs. And then once I got rid of that story, well, then I became the successful kid that came from the burbs, and then it just changed. So the first thing we have to do is become aware of our stories, know what these stories are, and we're going to change them. And if we hear ourselves saying a story in our heads that's stopping us, well, then we've got to change it. And that's as simple as saying, I'm the poor kid from the burbs to I'm the success story, the poor kid that became a rich kid, and so then put that new story in. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing, and we're sort of hovering now around point 6, and that is we've really got to start seeing ourselves as the identity that is that successful self. And that goes back to that exercise that I was talking about while we're in alpha, seeing ourselves as that person. Now, before I became a speaker and before I became a coach and a trainer, I wasn't, of course. And so what I did was I physically went through the training, mentally went through the training, financially invested in the training, did everything I had to do, but my identity needed to come with that. So each night I had this one image, and I don't use it anymore because I now am that image, but I used to see myself on a stage and I used to see myself talking to people. And, at first it felt scary. And then I fell in love with the idea and I loved it. And that was the image that I held in my head every time opportunities came for that. And then eventually I got on stages and I started getting exactly what I thought I was going to get. And, now that is part of my identity. Now that's how I see I am. Now, I've equally written a lot of books. Before that, my very first coaching session was to help me to get over the fear of writing a book. And so my coach worked with me. I then wrote my book, and then I had to re-identify myself as an author, and I had to see myself as an author. So the seeing part is really important, because what we see is when we look out of our own eyes, we don't actually see ourselves. You know, we see everything else, but we don't actually see ourselves. So that fourth dimensional way of looking is really powerful, because you've got to see yourself fourth dimensionally sometimes. And there's two elements. I call it lower fourth and higher fourth. Lower fourth can be, oh, look at you, piece of shit. You know, oh, look at you. You know, you're not going to achieve at anything. That's what I would call lower fourth. Higher fourth is, look at you. You know, I see the potential. You know, get out there. You can do this. You can do, and talk to yourself in that particular way. So I think the seeing is the visual element, and human beings, we are very visual. We see things in our mind's eye, and we replicate those things through our mindset to really meet the picture. So we've got to have that picture, you know, and we've got to know that picture intimately, such as, you know, if you're a huge success, and I guess this is the question I'd like to ask everyone that's watching this right now. If you're a success, what does that look like? Like, what are you wearing? You know, how are you standing, or are you sitting? What are you doing in that picture? Who's around you in that picture? What environment are you in that picture? How old are you in that picture? And this is powerful stuff. I'll give you an example of this. Back in the GFC, the global financial crisis, there were two financial planners that I was coaching at the time. Both of them were weirdly blind. Like that, instantly. They went from sight to no sight. One of them lost sight in one eye. The other one lost sight in both eyes. And the one that had lost sight in both eyes, I said to him, so tell me about this. So I'm looking at the reality first. Tell me about this. Give me your map. Why are you blind? And he said, I don't know. He said, I went to see my doctor, and my doctor didn't know why I got blind. And I said, so when will you not be blind? And he said, probably 3 months. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, because my doctor said that it'll probably come back in 3 months. And I said, wait a minute, let's look at the facts. The facts were you went to see a specialist or a GP. They then looked at your eyesight. They looked at your eyes. They looked at you, and they scratched their heads. And they said, I don't know what's going on. How can someone who does not know what's going on tell you that you'll get your eyesight back in 3 months? Now, this particular gentleman decided not to continue the coaching. I called him back about 4 months later, and I said, so just checking in with you. How are you going? And he said, fantastic. Got my eyesight back. And I said, how long did it take? He said, 3 months. You know, but the thing is really interesting. What our beliefs actually do are just absolutely hugely, hugely, hugely powerful. So, you know, I think that's a really key point, is we've got to be able to see ourselves and understand that new identity intimately. And we've really got to know what it feels like. Like, for example, when, you know, Arnie Schwarzenegger, you know, was building himself up to Mr. Universe, there was, like, he records it now, of course, with hindsight, and he says, you know, I had it in my mind. I saw myself there. I saw myself with the trophy. I saw myself achieving. And he's been using that same strategy, you know, to win his title, to then become a movie star or get his first movie gig, and then get to become a superstar, and then, you know, become a governor, you know, in the US and so forth. That's been he sees it in his mind eye, and very clearly. But if we see something and we're saying in our heads that's not possible, that's certainly where coaching's required. You know, that's where you've got to get someone to help you to get that conflicting idea out of your mindset, so you can congruently be here, know what the map is, know what you need to change, and go ahead and change it and do it to actually get there. But if something's stopping that process, then we've got to get in there. We've got to find out what is that part of the process.
So trying to recap, right? So we have the goal, we have the reality, we have the self-sabotage, which, you know, like keeps us from doing things. We have the beliefs that drive a lot of what we perceive ourselves to be able or capable of, right? And then if I've done everything right to that point, and I'm in my day-to-day life, there's still going to be a situation, you know, where I fall through and I'm not going to following the steps and the roadmap, right? So I know you mentioned in the road up to this interview a state of mind which determines something that is happening in the moment. So maybe if you can just walk us through what that state of mind is in the moment and how we can maybe even change it to be able to act upon all the previous steps if we've done them right.
Yeah. The most important thing about state of mind is really a state of mind is more than just a state of thinking. It's also a state of physicality. So what we want to be able to do is choose the most appropriate state to be in every single moment. And there is no one state for everything. Many years ago, I used to think that calm, you know, being really calm was a really good state. Until one day I went, you know, heading towards a surf, and the surf was ginormous. They were quite large waves. And I realized that a calm state wasn't appropriate to be in the water in those big waves. I actually had to really build myself up, you know, and almost get quite aggressive, competitive, you know, in my state in order to work with that new environment. You know, if you're surfing a 3-4 foot wave, sure, you can be quite calm. But when the waves get bigger, you've got to work faster. You know, you can get hurt a lot more in larger surf and so forth. And in fact, you can drown. So you've got to be in a different state. So the most important thing is if we think about anything we're doing, like if we're working, you know, in the context of exercising, we typically have to kind of build ourselves up. Like if you're doing, you know, weight type work, you know, sometimes it helps to actually, you know, create a noise, you know, on the breathing out, you know, or perhaps a different noise on the breathing in. And they might be loud, but what they're doing is it's almost like in primitive cultures, you know, when they're beating drums, you know, when they're getting people to do things, and essentially you're getting yourself into trance. So there are certain states that we need to be in. However, equally, if you're working in an environment where, you know, your achievement is down to how well you present to a board, for example, then you're not going to be beating drums or, you know, making noises you breathe in and out. You know, you're going to look like a lunatic walking into an office doing that strategy, your exercise strategy, in a presentation strategy. Your presentation strategy might need to be calmer. So how do we adjust this? The ways that we adjust our state is typically the first and easiest thing to do is adjust your posture. So, you know, if you're watching this right now, just imagine, just measure yourself in the context of confidence right now. So just imagine, you know, you're 8 or 7 or 6 or 3 or 2, measure your own confidence, and then just raise your sternum like that, and then measure your confidence again. And typically your numbers should have gone up, you know, so just lifting your sternum tends to open you up. And actually there's a really good YouTube on this. There's a woman called Amy Cuddy, and it's a popular TED talk, and she talks about, you know, power positions, you know, power posture. So, you know, that's one example of state. It's the physiology of state. So you can change your state by changing your physiology. So that's one thing. Another way to do it is we have a memory, and that is all the things that we've done in the past. And, you know, for the large majority of us, we've all had many happy experiences. We've all had many really driven experiences. We've had many wild and crazy experiences, and we've had calm experiences. So we choose whatever we think is going to be the best state to create the opportunity, to serve the opportunity best. So all we have to do is just, and it's often better to close your eyes and just get rid of reality for now. So closing your eyes kind of shuts down the now. And then we just go back into the past and we aim to recall an event which duplicates that sort of state that we want to duplicate. And we go into that and recall it as best as we can. Now, what we want to be able to do is we want to see it. So we want to see it. We want to hear it. And if we can't remember what the sounds were, we'll have to make them up. But we want to hear what it was like. Was it loud? Was it noisy? Was it quiet? Was it calm? Was there music in the background? Were there voices? Was it excited or was it different? And so we remember the sounds. So now we've got a visual and an auditory. We've got two senses working. If we can now add a third sense, which is the thoughts in our heads, so we say, oh, this is amazing. Oh, this is amazing. Oh, this is amazing. Which is very different to, oh, this is amazing. It's a different tonality, yeah? So we get the right tonality and the right sort of, sentence in our head running over as we're seeing it and hearing it. Now we've got three going for us. Now, if we can get the fourth one going, we've now got magic. The fourth one is essentially our feelings in our body. So the fourth one is typically you'll have calm in a particular space. You'll have excitement, which will be in another space in your body. You will have courage in another space. And you might have absolutely unbridled, total motivation will be in another part of your body. So as you get to master where these feelings are in your body and where these feelings are essentially in your past, what will happen is you will be able to get them just like a library and just grab those events and just live them, relive them again, so that what happens is you get all this amazing feeling or the appropriate feeling, whatever is the appropriate feeling in your body. And typically you will do what you feel. You will not always do what you think. But if your thoughts and your feelings are equal and congruent, you will do that. But if your feelings are different to your thoughts or your thoughts are different to your feelings, typically we won't do that. That's called a conflict. So essentially that's how you can change state. So first is posture. The other is, it's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's going back through your catalog of the past and bringing these things up and recalling them and allowing yourself to feel it. Such as, have you ever been really happy and had depressing thoughts? Have you ever been really depressed and had happy thoughts? It's incongruent. So typically we will aim to be as congruent with our feelings as possible or as congruent to our thoughts as possible, whichever one has got the stronger element. Typically emotions will have a stronger element than even thoughts.
So just to wrap up as well, Rik, you mentioned earlier about vision, having a vision beyond yourself, beyond your own interest. What is your vision and what continues propelling you doing the work that you do?
First of all, from a very away motivated perspective, when I look at the world today, I see a contrast, and I see a lot of people, who are, now teenagers, adolescents, and I see this new generation having a really good mindset. Many of them have a really good mindset. But what I see is a bit of an old world. And I see, depression is on the rise, obesity is on the rise, drug dependence is on the rise. Like if we had to look at what are the modal operators of a healthy planet, unfortunately, there are many boxes that are crossed. And so I actually have on my telephone, I have this calendar. And what I've done is on this calendar, it tells me I predicted when I'm not going to be around anymore. So it's called Meeting with God or Meeting with the Universe. So every day, and while I'm chatting with you, I'm actually going to tell you what my number is. And so every day I look at this particular number and I realize that I've got, here we go, I now have 16,333 days left. So that might sound like a lot to you, but I promise you that number diminishes quite rapidly. I remember when I first started looking at my life this way, I nearly lost my life at one point. I got carted out to sea in a rip at night with sharks and a whole bunch of things. But it really made me think about life. And I thought, as I was being taken out to sea, and it was at night, and it was in really big surf, and I thought, I could actually die tonight. And I thought, do I really want to die? I mean, is it done? Have I done everything I really wanted to do? And the answer to that was no. I was at the time, I was writing a book called The Power of Beliefs. It was on my computer. No one knew where it was except for me. My publisher was waiting for it, and it was still sitting there on my computer. And I thought, well, no one's going to read The Power of Beliefs. It's going to be sitting there on my computer. I'm going to die, and it's going to be over. So the question was, is my time over? And I realized at that moment, no, it wasn't, because I look at the world and I really have a lot of hope for the future. I really think with the sort of people that are being born in the world today, and, you know, the teenagers and, you know, the adolescents and tomorrow's teenagers and the ones even, you know, that have not yet been born, I really believe that we've got the people to really create a fantastic planet. But the thing that's really missing, and not a lot of people are talking about this, the stuff that we've been talking about today, you know, the sort of mindset things are completely overlooked. There are still people who look at the sort of stuff that I do and go, beliefs, what a load of crap. You know, yet these same people have beliefs. That was a belief. But these things do predicate where we go. And I feel within myself, I really want to educate people. I want people to become wise. I want people to become smart about who they are. And I think when people achieve their goals, the great thing that happens is we can see what can be done. You know, Roger Bannister, who we were talking about earlier, when he, you know, hit that 4-minute mile, what he did, his life, if all it's amounted to was that was a pretty good achievement, because it just taught us that we're limited by our own thinking. You know, limited by our own beliefs. And the thing that I want to do more than ever is I want to keep writing books. I want to keep doing talks. I want to keep training. I want to educate people. How do you get results? Because when people get those results, they become an inspiration to others. And I guess inspiration is the fuel that I really want to get out there. Because when we get inspired, I mean, we are absolutely able to do anything. You know, I mean, Luke, you know, I met you years ago, and you, my friend, are a great inspiration, you know, of everything that you have actually done in your life, and, you know, where you took yourself from, where you take yourself to. And you have children, you know, and now your daughter looks up at you and goes, you know, that's my dad. And so that creates a potentiality for Sienna, you know, and that creates a potentiality when she models her great father. Then what happens is when she has children, of course, they'll look at her and go, wow, Mum, you're amazing, you know. And I think we as leaders, we as parents, you know, we're here not for ourselves. We're here to show what is possible. And sometimes that means just get out of your own way.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rik. Love it.
You're welcome.
Hope you've got a lot of value and inspiration from this presentation. For live Q&As and updates on the summit, join our Facebook group. You'll find the link below. Our goal is to reach 1 million people and help them become plant-fit inspirations in their communities. We believe that the right food and exercise can change your life, inspire those around you, and save the planet. Feel the same? Then check out our Plant Fit for Life package. Click the button below for more information and incredible bonuses by our experts. This is Toby and Luke signing off from the Plant Fit Summit, and see you for the next presentation.